FBI agent Malcolm Reed felt the stares before he saw them. Settling into seat 23B, he instinctively registered the whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle movements of passengers shifting away. His 15 years with the Bureau had honed his ability to read a crowd like a book, and this first-class cabin was broadcasting unease. A woman in a designer suit, seated a few rows ahead, watched him with open disgust as he stowed his carry-on. Her diamond-laden fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the armrest. Malcolm adjusted his jeans and a plain t-shirt, standard undercover attire for the Los Angeles briefing he was headed to. The mission details, secure on his phone, suddenly felt precarious under the woman's piercing gaze. He wondered if his cover was already compromised. As the flight attendant passed, the woman's hand shot up, her voice echoing through the cabin. "Excuse me, I need to change seats. I don't feel comfortable here." Malcolm's jaw tightened. This wasn't about comfort. It was a prelude to a confrontation he hadn't yet begun to fight. Becoming an FBI agent hadn't always been Malcolm Reed's ambition. Growing up in Baltimore's inner city, he dreamed of following in his father's footsteps as a civil rights attorney. Witnessing his community grapple with crime and over-policing, however, ignited a different kind of fire in him, a desire to effect change from within the system. Now, at 38, his 15 years with the Bureau validated that decision. He'd earned a reputation as one of their most effective undercover operatives. Today's flight to Los Angeles should have been routine. The briefing awaiting him involved a complex money laundering case, the kind that demanded his unique talent for becoming invisible. He perfected the art of blending in, whether navigating corporate boardrooms or shadowy back alleys. His ability to decipher people, understand their prejudices, and exploit their blind spots was both his shield and his weapon. This morning, however, felt different. His usual pre-mission ritual, a 5 a.m. workout, meditation at 6, followed by immersing himself in case files, had been disrupted by a frantic call from his mother. His father's Parkinson's was progressing, and the insurance company was refusing to cover a new medication. An hour on the phone battling bureaucratic red tape meant a missed workout and a near sprint to catch his flight. Now, dressed in civilian clothes instead of his usual suit, he felt exposed. The weight of his badge, hidden beneath his t-shirt, pressed against his chest, a tangible reminder of the duality of his role, a source of both protection and potential exposure. His phone buzzed with updates about the LA operation, a year-long investigation reaching its critical stage. His team relied on him, on his calm professionalism, on his ability to maintain his cover. Yet, as he sat in 23B, watching the woman in first class whisper to her seatmate and gesture in his direction, the familiar weight of assumptions and prejudices settled around him. He'd faced this throughout his career, suspects underestimating him, colleagues questioning his qualifications, and civilians seeing his skin color before his badge. He usually let it slide. Today, however, burdened by his father's health and the weight of the impending mission, the woman's disdain struck a raw nerve. The plane hadn't even left the ground, and already Malcolm's carefully constructed routine was unraveling. He had a premonition that this flight would test more than just his patience. It would challenge everything he trained for, everything he believed in, everything he fought so hard to become. The incident ignited an hour into the flight, just as the drink service commenced. Malcolm was reviewing case files on his phone when the woman's voice sliced through the cabin's hushed hum. "Excuse me! Excuse me!" Her voice dripped with the entitled outrage Malcolm had encountered countless times before. "This is completely unacceptable. I specifically requested sparkling water, not whatever this is." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, maintained a professional composure. "I apologize, ma'am, but we're currently out of sparkling water on this flight. Would you prefer still water or another beverage?" "Out? How can you be out? This is first class." The woman thrust the cup back at Sarah, sloshing some of its contents onto her pristine uniform. I want to speak to your supervisor. This is the kind of service I get for paying premium prices? Malcolm observed the unfolding scene, noting how the other passengers recoiled, shrinking into their seats as if trying to become invisible. He recognized the behavior, the instinct to avoid confrontation, to maintain the illusion of normalcy even when it was shattered. As an FBI agent, he'd learned that such moments often presaged something more troubling. He stood to stretch, careful to remain within the confines of his seat area, but the movement caught the woman's attention. Her eyes locked onto him like heat-seeking missiles, her expression morphing from general contempt to something darker, more personal. "And you," she snapped, jabbing a manicured finger in his direction. "Sit down. You're making everyone uncomfortable." Malcolm kept his voice steady and professional. "I'm not in the aisle, ma'am. Just stretching my legs. Don't you ma'am me." Her voice escalated, attracting more attention. "I've been watching you since we boarded. Acting like you own the place. This isn't your neighborhood." The racial undertone hung heavy in the air. Several passengers shifted uneasily, while others feigned absorption in their phones or magazines. Sarah, the flight attendant, froze, the drink cart momentarily forgotten. "I'm just trying to fly like everyone else," Malcolm said, maintaining his composure despite the familiar burn of anger rising in his chest. "There's no need to make this into something it isn't." The woman's face contorted with rage. "People like you always think you're the victim. You've been glaring at me since we boarded, haven't you? I can tell. You think you're entitled to everything." Malcolm remained standing, his FBI training kicking in. De-escalation was paramount, but so was holding his ground. Sitting down now would only embolden her, and reinforce her delusion of power. He'd learned this lesson early in his career. Sometimes, peaceful defiance was more potent than avoiding conflict. "Ma'am," he said, his voice projecting just enough authority to make nearby passengers glance up. "I haven't looked at you once. I've been focused on my own business, which is what I suggest you do." "Or what?" she challenged, her voice dripping with contempt. "Are you threatening me? Did everyone hear that? He's threatening me." She turned to her seatmate, an elderly man who looked profoundly uncomfortable. "You heard him threaten me, didn't you?" The absurdity of her accusation would have been laughable if it weren't so potentially damaging. Malcolm understood how quickly these situations could escalate, how easily her false claims could spiral into something that would jeopardize not only his comfort but his entire mission in Los Angeles. Sarah finally found her voice. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. You're disturbing the other passengers." "I'm disturbing them?" The woman's voice reached a new crescendo. "What about him? Standing there, intimidating everyone? I should call security the moment we land. I bet you don't even belong on this flight. I bet you're one of those people who got your ticket through some diversity program or whatever they're calling it these days." Malcolm felt the weight of his FBI badge pressing against his chest, hidden beneath his t-shirt. One simple movement, one flash of identification, could end this charade. But that would blow his cover, potentially jeopardizing months of painstaking investigative work. The operation in Los Angeles was too important to risk over one passenger's blatant racism. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "Ma'am, I paid for my ticket just like you did. The only difference is, I'm trying to have a peaceful flight." The woman's eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile spread across her face. "Oh, we'll see about peace. We'll see about that." The tension in the cabin thickened like storm clouds gathering before a tempest. Malcolm returned to his seat, but the woman, whom other passengers had begun referring to as Karen, in hushed whispers, wasn't finished. Her initial outburst had opened a floodgate, and now she seemed determined to make the entire flight revolve around him. "I just don't feel safe," she announced loudly, her voice echoing through the cabin, directed at no one in particular. "You never know these days. They let anyone on planes now." Malcolm felt his phone buzz in his pocket, another update about the Los Angeles operation. He couldn't check it now, not with Karen watching his every move like a hawk. The stakes of his mission flashed through his mind: months of undercover work, a complex network of money launderers, and millions in illegal funds. One wrong move here could compromise everything. A young woman 2 rows ahead turned around, her face creased with concern. "Ma'am, you're the only one causing problems here. Maybe you should try to get some rest?" Karen's eyes lit up at the new target. "Oh, so you're defending him? How generous. I suppose you think we should just ignore suspicious behavior? I've been on enough flights to know when something isn't right." The young woman flushed but held her ground. "The only suspicious behavior I've seen is yours." Other passengers began to stir, the cabin subtly dividing into camps. Some nodded in agreement with the young woman, while others shifted uncomfortably, Karen's constant insinuations of danger planting seeds of doubt in their minds. Malcolm recognized the psychology at play. Fear was contagious, and Karen was weaponizing it expertly. Sarah, the flight attendant, returned with her supervisor, a more senior attendant named Michael. "Is there a problem here?" Michael asked, his tone professionally neutral, his eyes sharp and observant. "Yes, there is," Karen declared, pointing at Malcolm again. "This man has been acting suspiciously since we boarded. He keeps checking his phone, he won't stay in his seat, and he threatened me earlier." "That's not true," the young woman interjected. "She's been harassing him." Michael raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Ma'am, we've had no reports of suspicious behavior. If you have specific concerns—" "Of course, you haven't had reports," Karen interrupted. "Everyone's too afraid to say anything. But I'm not. I've seen how he keeps looking at his phone, all secretive. What's he hiding? And why is he dressed like that on a business flight?" Malcolm's jaw clenched. His casual clothes, specifically chosen to maintain his cover, were now being used against him. The irony wasn't lost on him. His efforts to blend in were making him stand out exactly when he needed to remain invisible. An elderly man across the aisle cleared his throat. "Young man, maybe you could show us some ID? Just to put everyone's mind at ease." The suggestion hung in the air like a lit fuse. Malcolm could feel the weight of his FBI badge against his chest, but revealing it now would unravel everything. He thought of his father, battling Parkinson's back home, of the years he'd spent building his career, of the crucial operation waiting in Los Angeles. All of it balanced precariously on the edge of a knife. "I showed my ID at security, just like everyone else," Malcolm replied evenly. "I'm not obligated to prove anything to random passengers." Karen seized on his refusal like a prosecutor with a smoking gun. "See? He won't show his ID. What's he hiding? First, he threatens me, now he won't prove who he is. I demand that the air marshal be notified." The mention of law enforcement sent a ripple of tension through the cabin. Malcolm almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity, if she only knew. Instead, he watched as her accusations began to take root, poisoning the atmosphere with suspicion. A businessman in a crisp suit lowered his laptop and leaned forward. "Look, nobody wants trouble here. But maybe it would be easier just to show some ID? Clear this whole thing up?" "Yeah," another passenger chimed in. "What's the big deal if you have nothing to hide?" Malcolm felt the familiar weight of prejudice settling around him. How many times had he faced this in his career? The constant demand to prove himself, to justify his presence in spaces where others moved freely? Even with a badge, even with years of service protecting the very people who now viewed him with suspicion, he was still seen as a threat until proven otherwise. Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped closer to Malcolm's row, her voice low and apologetic. "Sir, I'm so sorry about this, but is there any way you could—" "No," Malcolm said firmly, meeting her gaze. "I'm not showing ID. I have every right to be on this flight, and I won't participate in this harassment." His refusal sent Karen into a fresh frenzy. "Did you hear that? He refuses to prove who he is. This is exactly what they train us to look out for in those security videos. Suspicious behavior, unwillingness to comply with reasonable requests." The cabin temperature seemed to rise with the mounting tension. Malcolm could see Michael, the supervisor, speaking quietly into his phone, presumably contacting the cockpit. The young woman who had defended him earlier was now being berated by Karen for supporting potential terrorists, while other passengers either stared at their phones in uncomfortable silence or openly watched the drama unfold. Malcolm's phone buzzed again, a third update from his team. The operation was moving forward in Los Angeles, pieces falling into place for the bust they'd spent months preparing for. He needed to check that message, needed to stay connected with his team, but he knew that looking at his phone now would only add fuel to Karen's accusations. "I saw him checking his phone again." Karen's voice rose higher. "He's probably coordinating with others. This is how they work, you know. They have networks, they communicate in code." "Ma'am," Michael cut in firmly, "you need to lower your voice." But Karen was beyond reason. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, swaying slightly as the plane hit a patch of turbulence. "I will not be silenced. We're all in danger here, and nobody's doing anything about it. If the crew won't act, then I will. I'm making a citizen's arrest." The absurdity of her declaration would have been comical if it weren't so potentially dangerous. Malcolm knew from experience how quickly these situations could turn violent. One wrong move, one overzealous passenger trying to play hero, and things could spiral out of control at 35,000 feet. The "fasten seatbelt" sign dinged on, accompanied by the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Karen remained standing, her face flushed with self-righteous anger. "Not until something is done about this situation. I demand that he be moved to the back of the plane where he can be watched." The racial implications of her demand hung in the air like smoke, choking the atmosphere with their ugly history. Malcolm felt decades of progress crumbling around him, replaced by the same old prejudices wrapped in new excuses. The plane lurched again, but Karen maintained her defiant stance, gripping the seats for balance. The cabin had become a pressure cooker, with Malcolm at its center. His phone buzzed once more, a fourth message from his team. Whatever was happening in Los Angeles, it was urgent. But he couldn't check it, not now. Not with every eye in the cabin scrutinizing his every move. "Sir?" Michael, the lead flight attendant, addressed Malcolm directly, his voice strained. "Perhaps we could move you to a different seat? Just to defuse the situation?" Before Malcolm could respond, Karen's triumphant voice cut through the cabin. "Yes. Remove him. Finally, someone's listening to reason." "No," Malcolm said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of years of dealing with discrimination. "I'm not moving. I paid for this seat, I have every right to be here, and I won't be displaced because of someone else's prejudice." A new voice joined the fray, the tall businessman who had earlier suggested showing ID. But this time, his tone was different. "He's right. This is ridiculous. Lady, you're the one who needs to sit down and be quiet." Karen's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How dare you? I'm trying to protect everyone here. Don't you watch the news? Don't you know what's happening in this country?" Malcolm's phone vibrated again, longer this time, a call, not a text. His team never called unless it was critical. The operation must be reaching a crucial phase, and here he was, trapped in this airborne nightmare of racism and paranoia. Suddenly, the plane dropped, hitting a severe pocket of turbulence. Several passengers gasped. Karen, still standing, stumbled forward, nearly falling into Malcolm's row. She caught herself but used the moment to her advantage. "He tried to grab me!" she shrieked, though Malcolm hadn't moved an inch. "Did everyone see that? He tried to assault me." "That's a lie!" the young woman who had defended him earlier shouted. "He didn't move! I'm recording all of this on my phone." The revelation that someone was recording sent a chill down Malcolm's spine. If that video got out, if his face ended up on social media, months of undercover work could be compromised. The stakes had just risen exponentially. Michael stepped forward again, his patience wearing thin. "Ma'am, please return to your seat immediately, or we'll be forced to take more serious action. More serious action? Karen's voice dripped with sarcasm. Like what? You've done nothing so far. This man is a threat, and I'm the only one brave enough to say it. Check his phone. I bet if you check his phone, you'll find proof. Malcolm's hand instinctively moved to his pocket where his bureau-issued phone contained classified information about the operation. If anyone tried to force him to unlock it. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. Due to the ongoing disturbance, we're considering making an emergency landing. I need all passengers to return to their seats immediately. A collective groan went up from the cabin. Several passengers shot hostile glares toward Karen, but she seemed energized by the announcement. Yes. Land the plane. We need law enforcement involved. I want him arrested the moment we land. The irony of her demand wasn't lost on Malcolm. But now he faced an impossible choice. If they made an emergency landing, he'd miss his connection in Los Angeles. The operation would proceed without him, potentially putting his colleagues at risk. But if he revealed his identity now to prevent the landing, he'd blow his cover and compromise months of work. His phone buzzed yet again. 6 messages now. The 7th vibration broke his resolve. He had to at least glance at it. As discreetly as possible, he pulled out his phone. Look! Karen pounced immediately. He's doing it again! He's sending messages to his accomplices! Oh, for God's sake! The businessman exploded, standing up. The man is checking his phone! Everyone on this plane has checked their phones! You're the only security threat here with your racist paranoia! The cabin erupted into chaos. Multiple passengers began shouting at once, some defending Malcolm, others backing Karen, while still others just wanted everyone to shut up so the flight could continue. Flight attendants rushed back and forth, trying desperately to maintain order. Amid the chaos, Malcolm managed to glimpse his messages. His blood ran cold. The operation in Los Angeles had been moved up. They needed him there in 3 hours, not 6. If this plane got diverted. That's it. Michael's authoritative voice cut through the noise. Security will be waiting at our arrival gate. Until then, anyone who leaves their seat will be restrained. This is your final warning. Karen finally sat down, but her eyes remained fixed on Malcolm, burning with suspicion and hatred. You think this is over? She hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Just wait until we land. Just wait until security sees what I've seen. Your little act isn't fooling me. Malcolm closed his eyes, his mind racing. The operation in Los Angeles was crucial. They were tracking millions in cartel money, and his role was key to the bust. But now, thanks to one woman's prejudice, he might be trapped in an airport security office instead of making his connection. His fingers brushed against his FBI badge again. One simple revelation could end this whole ordeal. But at what cost? How many cases would be compromised? How many months of work are undone? And beyond that, why should he have to prove himself? Why should he have to reveal his identity just to be treated with basic human dignity? The plane shuddered through another patch of turbulence, and Malcolm made his decision. He'd face down drug lords, corrupt officials, and hardened criminals. He wouldn't let one bigoted passenger destroy everything he'd worked for. Whatever waited at the arrival gate, he would handle it. But as the plane began its initial descent, he couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Karen's smug expression told him she had more planned for their landing, and time was running out for both him and his operation. The descent into Los Angeles felt interminable. Through the window, Malcolm could see the sprawling city lights growing closer, each minute bringing him nearer to the inevitable confrontation at the gate. His phone had finally stopped buzzing. Either his team had given up trying to reach him, or something had already gone wrong with the operation. Karen had spent the last 20 minutes of the flight whispering intensely with the flight attendants near the front of the plane. Her animated gestures and occasional pointed glances in his direction made it clear she was building her case. Malcolm noticed she'd been taking notes on her phone, probably documenting her twisted version of events. They've called ahead to security. The young woman who had been recording earlier leaned forward to whisper to Malcolm. I heard them radio it in. She's trying to have you detained as soon as we land. Malcolm nodded slightly, his mind racing through possible scenarios. The operation in Los Angeles was scheduled for 11 p.m., barely 3 hours from now. If airport security detained him, even briefly, the entire case could fall apart. His team was counting on him to play a crucial role in the money exchange. As the plane descended through the clouds, Karen made another show of warning nearby passengers. Everyone be ready, she announced loudly. Don't let him rush off the plane. He needs to be held accountable. The businessman who had defended Malcolm earlier snorted in disgust. Lady, the only one who needs to be held accountable is you. I've got the whole thing on video too. Good, Karen shot back. Then you've got evidence of his suspicious behavior. I saw how he kept checking his phone, and how he wouldn't show his ID. That's exactly what they tell us to watch for. The plane banked sharply, beginning its final approach. Malcolm could see police lights flashing near the terminal, standard procedure for reported disturbances, but it complicated everything. Even if he showed his FBI credentials now, the local police would need time to verify them. Time he didn't have. His fingers traced the outline of his badge through his shirt. The weight of it felt heavier now, a symbol of everything he'd worked for, everything he'd achieved despite people like Karen who tried to stand in his way. But revealing it would mean more than just blowing his cover. It would mean letting her prejudice win, being forced to prove his legitimacy just to avoid harassment. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk. Karen immediately unbuckled her seatbelt, half rising despite the illuminated signs. Ma'am! Remain seated! Michael barked, his professional demeanor finally cracking. I'm making sure he doesn't get away, she insisted, craning her neck to keep her eyes on Malcolm. The plane touched down hard, the cabin rattling with the force of deceleration. Malcolm could feel the tension reaching its breaking point. Multiple passengers had their phones out now, recording what they surely expected to be a dramatic confrontation at the gate. As they taxied to their gate, Malcolm's phone lit up with one final message. He risked a glance. Exchange moved up. Must have you in position by 10:30 p.m. Critical timing. Respond ASAP. That gave him less than 2 hours. If he got detained by airport security, the entire operation would be compromised. Months of work, millions in criminal assets, and the chance to take down a major money laundering operation, all hanging in the balance because one entitled woman couldn't mind her own business. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Before anyone could move, Karen was on her feet. Nobody let him leave, she shouted, pointing dramatically at Malcolm. Security needs to question him. He's been acting suspicious this entire flight. Multiple passengers stood you but did not help Karen. The businessman, the young woman with the phone, and several others positioned themselves in the aisle, forming an impromptu barrier between Karen and Malcolm. The only suspicious person here is you, someone called out. The cabin crew looked overwhelmed, unsure whether to begin standard deplaning procedures or wait for security. Through the windows, Malcolm could see several police officers approaching the jet bridge. The moment of truth was coming. Whatever he decided to do next would have consequences, for his mission, for his career, and for every other person of color who had ever been profiled and harassed by someone like Karen. He stood slowly, deliberately, his badge feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds against his chest. The next few minutes would change everything. The moment the jet bridge connected, 2 airport police officers boarded the plane. Karen practically sprinted towards them, her designer heels clicking against the cabin floor. That's him, she declared triumphantly, pointing at Malcolm. He's been threatening passengers, acting suspiciously, checking secret messages on his phone. I want him detained and searched. The officers approached Malcolm cautiously. Sir, we need you to come with us, the first officer said, his hand resting near his belt. Malcolm stood calmly, his decision made. Officers, before we proceed, there's something you should know. He reached slowly into his shirt, aware of how the motion might be interpreted, and withdrew his FBI badge. Special Agent Malcolm Reed, FBI. I'm on an active operation, and I need to exit this plane immediately. The silence that fell over the cabin was absolute. Karen's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The officers straightened immediately, their postures shifting from authoritative to respectful. Agent Reed, the lead officer said, examining the badge. We apologize for the inconvenience. Do you need an escort to your connection? Malcolm shook his head, his eyes fixed on Karen. No escort needed. But I do want it noted that this woman repeatedly harassed me, made false accusations, and attempted to interfere with a federal investigation through her racially motivated accusations. The young woman who had been recording stepped forward. I have it all on video, Agent Reed. Every racist thing she said, every false accusation. Would you like a copy for your report? Karen finally found her voice, though it had lost all its previous authority. I was just trying to be vigilant. How was I supposed to know? He was acting suspicious. No, ma'am, Malcolm replied, his voice carrying through the silent cabin. You saw a black man in casual clothes and decided he didn't belong. You tried to get me removed from this flight, detained by security, and potentially compromised a major federal investigation, all because of your prejudice. The officers turned to Karen. Ma'am, we'll need to take a statement from you. Making false reports and interfering with a federal agent are serious offenses. As Karen stammered excuses, Malcolm gathered his belongings. He had a mission to complete, and he'd already spent too much time dealing with one person's bigotry. But before he left, he turned back to her one final time. The next time you feel the need to protect everyone from someone who looks like me, he said, remember this moment. Remember how wrong you were, and how your prejudice nearly compromised the very safety you claim to care about. With that, he strode off the plane, leaving Karen to face the consequences of her actions. His phone buzzed again. The operation was waiting. He had justice to serve, and not even Karen's racism could stop him from doing his job.